Thanks for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I am here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Canada should be a mining superpower as well. So says Dr. Heather Exner-Pirot. She is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute think tank. Let's hear more. Welcome back to Boom and Bust, Heather.
Great to be here.
First question, Canada already has a lot of mines, but what is the potential for more?
Yeah, so, we've been talking a lot about being an energy superpower. Mining is, kind of always a little brother to the oil and gas sector in Canada, but obviously there's tremendous potential there, and that's becoming more and more geopolitically important. So we're huge producers of potash, metallurgical coal, some iron, some copper, nickel. We're a great producer of copper, of nickel. But when we're talking about the security risks, we're talking about some of these niche or lightly traded metals. The things that China is able to dominate the market with, manipulate the market with, and is putting on export restrictions. And we're starting to see that affect our supply chains, not least in the defense sector. So we need to look beyond kind of what are those big GDP drivers, what are the things that attract billions investment, and start thinking about how to become a bigger player in those smaller markets of niche metals.
Yeah, and so your point basically is that there's these metals are more strategic these days. They are part of a nation's national security strategy and so on. So is there a big opportunity for Canada in this field?
I mean, there's on the security and the political side. So, what has happened is that China has been very strategic, to their credit, of monopolizing some of these smaller metals for which the global market might be a couple hundred million or a few, small billion. So
Right.
Not large markets, not where you can have a lot of competition. There might be 3 or 4 players in the world. And I think when the earth was flat and we just had globalization and just pure free trade, no kind of security afterthought, then okay, we were fine with just getting from China. They were lowest cost producer. But now that the world is much more geopolitically fraught, we're seeing kind of the downsides of that approach, that it is very important, that is worth a little bit of money, that the government does need to ensure that we have the security of supply. And so what is the opportunity for Canada? A lot of the things that China has put export restrictions on, here we're talking about rare earths, gallium, germanium, antimony, are also the things that, for example, NATO considers defense critical minerals. These are things that are either, Canada used to produce, that Canada could produce, or more likely than not, they're byproducts of things that we produce now, but it was never economic to develop them and process them on their own.
I'm glad you mentioned China as well, because I found it really interesting to see what happened with the U.S.-China dynamic. U.S. imposed major tariffs on China, seemed to be talking tough, decoupling from the Chinese markets, etc. Then all China had to do was turn off the tap on critical minerals. And all of a sudden, President Trump and the U.S. administration was saying, "Oh no, we don't want to restrict semiconductors when it comes to China. We want to have a trade relationship with China." And to me, it was always about the fact that they realized without access to Chinese produced rare earth minerals and what that would mean for their defense sector, as well as other sectors, they'd be in real trouble. Is that your analysis of the situation as well?
Well, it is. And I would say for the last 10 years at least, China has demonstrated this willingness to manipulate these markets. And we first started with rare earths. And why we conflate rare earths with critical minerals is because in those particular rare earths, that set of 15 elements, China kind of cornered the market on those first and has been manipulating them for well over a decade. And so, they do. And when there were competitors starting to rise, including in Canada, usually what they would do is flood the market.
Right.
And just undermine the business case for anyone else to compete, even if it took them subsidizing, that product. Now we're seeing the opposite happen. So that was, the strategy was to flood and dump. And now the strategy is export restrictions, that China has had to move to that next level and is actually restricting the export of things that we need. Again, I always say, in my, $60,000 Forerunner, the battery may only be $150, but if the battery's not working, the rest of the Forerunner is used.
That's it.
So we're talking about, small components, small parts. It's not the whole F-35, but it's a part that you actually need to build that F-35. And China has restricted that. Now, what's interesting is that the market is reacting in a normal market way now that it's not being manipulated. So things like antimony, bismuth, and rare earths, now that China has exited the global market in a sense, is not participating.
Let's talk more about that. I want to hear about that. We're going to take a brief break though. We'll be back with you to continue the discussion. Please stand by.